Today is National Indigenous Peoples Day. The entire month of June is National Indigenous History Month. And just to tell you a little bit about it, I found this on the Assembly of First Nations website. It says the month of June is National Indigenous History Month in Canada. And it says that all Canadians are encouraged to learn more about First Nations contributions, cultures, languages, and ceremonies, and to take part in events on or around June 21st. The day is also meant to shine a spotlight on Inuit and Métis cultures, and today we are talking about all of that. We're talking about what you've learned and how you've learned it and why you've learned it. We're also talking about how you're marking the day. Here in Montreal, Nakasset is the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal. As she says in an article on the CBC website, it's a day to celebrate because, man, we don't get many days to celebrate as Indigenous communities. So today, you can talk about how you're celebrating. You can talk about what you've learned and why you've learned it, what you'd like to learn, what you're thinking about today. Phone number 514-597-4500. Toll free it is 1-877-597-4500. Our guest for the hour, I'm really pleased to say, is Eric Pouliot-Thisdale, who is a researcher in the history department at Université de Montréal. He's part Mohawk and part Innu, and he is here with us for the hour. Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Well, pleasure. Thanks to you.
So tell me, what are you thinking about today on National Indigenous Peoples Day?
Well, I think it's a good implementation that's been set forward, even though all the developments and the efforts of the government to move forward are excessively slow. It's very administrative, so it's taken quite a while to see some actual results.
So a day to celebrate, but also to think about how much there is still to do, or how little has been accomplished. Is that what you're telling me?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, while we're observing like the academic resources, for instance, that were brought to the various schools in both the English school board and the French school board, it took quite a while to be implemented, actually. So I think it's since 2017 and 2018 that it really started. The Minister of Education really invested from then, because before it was very, very archaic. I'm looking at a book, a book from 7th and 8th grade in the school from the Chenelière Education Edition. And within 300 pages, there's 4 pages concerning the Native history and customs.
You're laughing. That's not a lot. That's barely anything.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so today we've got the day, we've got the month, National Indigenous History Month. I wonder, what is your sense now? You say things are a little bit better in the last 3 or 4 years. What's your sense of how much people want to know about Indigenous history, the history of Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, well, it's been really updated in the medias over the last 10 years. Though school-wise and what's being offered to the students, it's still very, very low. I noticed that the English school boards seem to have been a little bit quicker than the French school boards. I know that there's, for instance, a great resource called Learn Quebec. And they do offer academic resources for all the various English school boards. That's an awesome website. Everybody should go check that out. It's called Learn Quebec. And they do offer many resources for every teacher and students as well. So that's a very good development. The school books, the editions of Le Renouveau Pédagogique, for instance, that I just mentioned, only 4 pages, it's really similar to those from the 70s, the 1970s years. So therefore, it's excessively long. And it still concerns the customs and life habits of the first inhabitants, and it's still very, very minor informations.
So,
Now
when
I
you say
know
that, when you say that it still concerns the habits of those people, what do you mean? What are you saying?
well, like for instance, they usually like give a little chart of years, 10,000 years before until, you know.
Yeah.
So a little time lapse kind of sheet that a board that they usually expose, a little map, and so it's really low in information. So right now, what are most schools doing is inviting natives to do class presentations, and that's pretty much the best way to add the substance to the subject. So now you have people coming by. Me, I was invited, for instance, in three times last year, and three times the 2 years ago, in various schools,
Yeah.
secondary schools, primary schools.
Secondary and primary. Okay. How does that go when you go into the school?
Well, people love it. The kids love it, and they want to know more. And it's always too short, an hour or two. So they have questions. The question period could last an hour as well. So they are eager to know, seemingly because they are lacking information in the classes, you know.
What kind of questions do you get? Do you remember any of them?
Well, they want to know more about the residential schools, these top residential schools, the day schools, and also about the customs. Because nowadays in the medias, everybody's on the residential schools, so of course the kids are into that as well. But they're very curious if people about their customs, if people are still practicing traditional customs, hunting and talking the original language and so on, the life habits. So they're very eager to know. I was even invited in the military college, and people were as eager to know. So it gives a good idea that information is absolutely lacking. There's only 2% Indigenous people in the province of Quebec. It's one of the lower rate demographical wise. So therefore, what's also happening is that most people that we see in the media representing First Nations are third generations that went to university, that had these opportunities and so on. So it's not always representing the whole Native community. So we need more people from communities to go talk on behalf of what's happening in communities. Not only like people like me, like third generation, you know what I mean, living off reserve. We need people in the context as well. So we need a little bit more representation than what we have now in the media, for instance, as well as in the academic fields. So when people rely on native resources, they often rely on people that have bachelors and so on. And who are these people through the native communities? It's quite often people from the third generation living off reserves.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
That's a little abyss, you know?
Yeah.
So therefore, we need to implement both sides, both academics and traditionalists, people that learn, you know, right from the elders. So it's really important to marry both resources for the academics.
That does seem important. That's Eric Pouliot-Thisdale who's talking. He's a researcher in the history department at Université de Montréal. And we are today talking about both National Indigenous History Month and today, which is National Indigenous Peoples Day. We're marking it all across CBC Radio. On the program today, we're asking you what have you learned about Indigenous history and culture, why you've learned it, what you're thinking about today. Phone number is 514-597-4500 or toll free from anywhere, 1-877-597-4500. 4500. I want to play you a little bit of the CBC radio program Unreserved. It's a radio program that features Indigenous voices. They did a special episode marking National Indigenous Peoples Day, celebrating the day. Host Rosanna Deerchild spoke with people in Winnipeg about what the day means to them. Here's just a little taste of that episode. And you can hear the whole program. It's on right after this, Tuesdays at 1 o'clock, also Saturdays at 4 o'clock. On Radio Noon today, we are marking National Indigenous Peoples Day. And Eric, we're going to go to the phone lines right now. We're going to go to Verdun. Tracy is here. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, how are you?
Doing quite well. How about you?
Great. I'm really glad you're doing this topic any day. It's an area that I have a lot of interest in. I am originally from Saskatchewan. I've only been in Quebec a few years, and I am a teacher as well. So I have two comments, kind of, one more personal and one professional, if that's all right.
Sure. Go ahead.
And I just want to preface by saying, by no means do I think Saskatchewan is perfect or has it all figured out, but there's always room to grow. But I do have to say that I was surprised when I came here to see some of the curriculum that really focuses on how Indigenous people lived in the past, and not a lot about how all of those past experiences affect them in the present and what people are doing today. So I found there was really a hole missing. I think one of the things your guest spoke...
right. So Tracy, is that sort of getting back to the point that Eric was making about sort of the
curriculum?
Yeah, and the culture of the past, but not so much around the present day. You would agree with that assessment? I
would,
right? Yeah,
and I would say that there's a danger in limiting our in sharing knowledge with kids and limiting to that, because what they then fail to understand is, why is this continued an issue, or why is it something we should all care about? What does it really mean in the whole context of being a Canadian, and how we look at our society? And I feel like there's really holes, and I also feel like it's not just the knowledge, it's the ways of knowing, and that was something I felt that Saskatchewan did try to do and is continuing to try to do in their curriculum, and that was to look at how Indigenous people learned, how they learned about the world, how they share their knowledge, and to incorporate ways of learning and ways of knowing into the curriculum so that we can also learn in the manner of from Indigenous knowledge and in the manner in which they learned as well.
And Tracy, would you be able to give me
amazing resources?
Yeah, would you be able to give me an example of that? I thought that was interesting what you said about not just the knowledge but the ways of knowing.
So our curriculums and the ways that we often teach and share are very European-centric. They was designed to make good workers for industrial complexes or whatever. And so when you look at how Indigenous people learned, and they go into, like, say, in science, well, in any subject, but science is a great example, because when you go into nature and you experience it firsthand, and you think about, you ask questions, it's not so much like you're just receiving some information to memorize. You actually have hands-on experience with, the plants and the animals and the soil and all of those things. And just thinking about ways that Indigenous elders might have taught their children years and years ago, and doing that instead of reading from a textbook or where you can, or do you know what, like, just more practical that way?
Yeah, Tracy, I want to ask Eric Pouliot-Thisdale how he is reacting to what you're saying and what's going through his mind. And Tracy, I want to thank you so much for calling. Eric, you've been listening to Tracy. What are you thinking?
Well, yeah, it's definitely one of the top things that should be really implemented. Hearing the elders and the traditional customs, because nowadays it's still always the history of the past that's being taught. And even when we're talking about the residential schools, it's always like the wrongful things that happened. Though the customs should be promoted, definitely. And also, besides the customs, like history-wise, I remember back then Harper, when he started promoting the War of 1812 and the native participants and so on, it eventually brought interesting contradictions, because in the War of 1812 that Harper promoted, the contribution of the Mohawks and so on, when they received the medal only in 1846, when most of the warriors died, and they created the reserves in 1851. And in 1851, to leave the reserve, he needed a permit. Also, the legal thing about the management of the creation of reserves is also a huge thing lacking. So we need to, to a certain extent, acknowledge both the traditions and also the parts of history that seems to have been blemished, and try to make a really good compromise with the hearings from the elders, and also repair parts of history that's been really slightly mentioned or included in the history programs.
Right.
Yes.
That's a lot. That's a lot. I want to bring somebody else into the conversation right now. We spoke with a teacher. I want to speak with another teacher. We'll have to break pretty soon because of the news. We'll continue the conversation after that. Cheryl Callio is an online teacher at the Lester B. Pearson School Board. She teaches kids who are learning online, in her case in grades 3 to 6, and she's made it part of her curriculum to teach her students about truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Cheryl Callio, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
So, what inspired you to do that, to decide that that was an important thing for you to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was driving along the 417 in Ontario, going towards Ottawa, around the 150th anniversary of the creation of Canada as a country, and I saw this huge billboard with an Indigenous man on it in his regalia, and it said 150 plus years of colonization. And it really just struck me that, not everybody had this raw Canada thing going on, and then that was the catalyst for me to start learning and unlearning some of the things that I had been taught and had believed. And so that sort of sparked this journey of, truth and reconciliation for myself, which I now bring to my students.
Okay. We have about a minute here. We will continue a little bit after the news break, but in a minute here, what do you do? How do you teach your students about all of that, the Indigenous history and truth and reconciliation?
All right, I'll try and squeeze it in.
Don't worry about it.
So I bookend my year with two big events. So in September, we spend the month of September looking at truth and reconciliation, because Orange Shirt Day is on the 30th. And we participate in the Truth and Reconciliation Week, which is usually sort of the end of September. This coming year, it's the 26th to the 29th. And then in June, I do the Summer Solstice Indigenous Festival with my students, which is all online based. And it's a lot of videos and truth from elders. It's all current. So it's, music, dancing, storytelling, games, things like that. But it's all authentic voices. So that's how I bookend my year. But then throughout the year, I pull in Indigenous voices and Indigenous work and ideas and topics and thoughts and issues. So,
Cheryl, I want to ask you, how do you figure out what to teach, what sources to go to? Where do you go to learn so that you can then teach?
So what I have found super invaluable is the University of Alberta's Indigenous Canada course, which is offered for free online. And I've taken that course a couple of times, actually, because I think we need a refresher every once in a while. So it's free online. and anybody can take it, and it walks you through Indigenous issues, like past to present. And so a lot of what Eric was talking about earlier with your previous caller, like that's all taught through there. So I think that that's like an amazing resource, and of course, like for it being free is just fantastic. So that's where I started. I think networking is also really important. So at the Lester B. Pearson School Board, we do have an Orange Shirt Day committee, which looks not just at Orange Shirt Day, but Indigenous curriculums and how we can improve them at the school board level, and at the we have a liaison with the government committee as well. So that's a really great place to sort of where teachers can get extra ideas and resources. But I've also I do a lot of research myself as well. So in this journey of learning and unlearning, like I have gone and I found the Summer Solstice Indigenous Festival, which has been amazing. My students love it, and that really brings the present day into our classroom. So it's not just the truth part or not just the history part, but it really, like, we do focus a lot on reconciliation as well. And by bringing in those authentic voices from different communities, like Indigenous communities around the world. So we've, from within Canada, we do focus on Indigenous communities elsewhere in the world as well, but obviously our primary focus is here in Canada. So we look at Inuit issues and culture. We look at Métis and First Nations as well. And then we do focus on the First Nations group that would have been, like, whose land we are on now. So we look at their history and sort of what the community is still doing. And I think that's been really eye-opening for my students. So I would definitely say, like, some research is really important, but also that Indigenous Canada course through the University of Alberta was amazing. I highly recommend it.
I'm curious to hear from Eric Pouliot-Thisdale, who is a researcher in the history department at Université de Montréal. So, Eric, you are listening along with me to Cheryl talking about what she's learned, where she has found it, what she's teaching. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts, any recommendations, or anything to add here?
Well, actually, the program she followed at the University of Saskatchewan or Manitoba? Alberta. That's an awesome program online that I've been on it as well. It's really rich, providing good resources for most teachers and students. And also, there's many books in the province of Quebec that are being delivered yearly, good native authors, and also good books on the legal status and legal situations, more and more being released. You can also go on the page of the Native Affairs governmental website. There's a lot of researches provided by natives and by collaborators of Native communities. So therefore, yeah, it is very, very rich resource-wise. You just have to take time really to go dig into those resources. Of course, yeah, Library and Archives Canada and the website of Native Affairs. And most universities in the Western provinces seems to, of course, demography-wise, there's a lot more natives out west compared to Quebec, only 2%. So therefore, it's really good to go see through all the Western universities' websites and resources. Here, of course, the biggest communities are the Crees, the Inus, and the Mohawks in the province of Quebec. So we more likely hear from those three principal nations, let's say, demography-wise, and from the missions. What's actually happening for instance, at l'UQAM University in Montreal and so on, it is still very, very classical what's being taught. And most teachers are non-natives, really prompt on their basic teachings that they received in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. So therefore, it's taking quite a while of being implemented and evolving in the province of Quebec.
It is a process. Listen, Cheryl,
Yes.
I want to thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us and sparking this part of the conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Sean and Eric, for having me and for doing this. It's really important. So thank you so much.
Appreciate again you participating. That's Cheryl Callio. She's an online teacher at the Lester B. Pearson School Board. Today, we're marking National Indigenous Peoples Day. Phone number is 514-597-4500. Toll-free number is 1-877-597-4500. CBC Music has put out a list today of 6 Indigenous artists you need to know in 2022. They released that today. One of them is Ruby Waters, and here's Ruby Waters with If It Comes Down to It. Phone number 514-597-4500 if Montreal is a local call. Let's go to Gail, who is calling from TMR. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Sean. I'm wondering from Eric if a phrase that I learned a long time ago is authentically Mohawk and what it might mean. It's hi-a-ho, and then there's a response that goes way away.
Eric, can you help us out with that?
Yeah, well, actually, the Mohawks communities are matriarchal. So therefore, in order to be like recognized by a Mohawk community, it has to be your mother, your grandmother, coming from your great grandmother. So it's matrilineal clans. Though back then in the old customs, they used to adopt many people from other nations, and when there was conflicts, captives were kept and incorporated into the nations. For instance, awkwardly, as I was talking about the War of 1812, there was a black man called Louis Cook in the War of 1812. He was adopted in Kahnawake. He later lived in Akwesasne. And his mother was Abenaki, and his father was black, though he was the chief in Akwesasne. So therefore, he had no clan, but he was adopted. He was incorporated. So these are really customs very different from a nation to another. And the adoption custom is very various also from a nation to another. So therefore, there's a lot of people that are descendants from a nation, and at the Native Affairs, which is literally just an administrative shop, somebody that has a grandfather that's Mohawk by the community might not be accepted since it's not his matrilineal line, though the Native Affairs will stamp you as a Mohawk, if I could say.
Right. So there's some bureaucracy involved. Gail, you were asking about a phrase. Maybe you could repeat that.
It's the hi-a-ho, and then I think, and then there's a response that goes way away, and I learned it in a summer camp called Camp Mohawk. I don't know if like we would have an act of drama during the summers too, and I don't know if it was on an island in the St. Lawrence.
Okay, so I guess you're asking if that is genuinely
exactly
Mohawk.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Eric, would you know that about that phrase?
Really, this very custom I'm not fully aware of, so I won't give my touch on it.
Okay, we'll get a chance to speak again. That's Eric Pouliot-Thisdale, who's a researcher in the History Department at Université de Montréal. Just a reminder here that as we mark National Indigenous Peoples Day here at CBC, you can find much more right across all of CBC's platforms. So CBC podcasts, new podcast that premiered today, all about Buffy Sainte-Marie. You can find that there. CBC Music has special playlists and special programming right here as well on CBC Radio 1 and on